The morning she called my dream a failure, the sun was shining so brightly through the dusty windows of my tiny workshop that it almost felt cruel. Outside, the world looked full of promise, birds cutting across the pale blue sky, neighbors washing cars, children laughing on their way to school, and delivery trucks humming down the street. But inside that cramped garage, surrounded by unsold wooden shelves, half-finished tables, and invoices I could barely pay, I stood completely still while the woman I loved looked at everything I had built and said it looked like the beginning of the end. Before this story continues, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and people who refuse to give up even when the world laughs at them, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Diaries. Your support helps stories like this reach someone who may be standing in their own broken little workshop, wondering if their dream is still worth fighting for. My name was Kairo then, and for almost 3 years I had been trying to turn my small handmade furniture business into something real. Not rich, not famous, not some overnight success people brag about online, just real enough to pay rent, help my mother with her medicine, and finally prove to myself that I was more than the warehouse worker I used to be. I made coffee tables, garden benches, floating shelves, and custom wooden signs from reclaimed lumber I bought cheap from construction sites. I loved the smell of sawdust in the morning and the quiet pride of turning rough, unwanted wood into something strong and beautiful. But love does not always pay bills, and by that spring morning, my business account had less money than my old lunchbox. My girlfriend, Mireya Soul, had been patient at first. In the beginning, she told me she admired my courage. She used to bring me coffee while I sanded tabletops and said my hands could make ordinary things feel alive. But patience becomes heavy when success takes too long. Over time, her compliments turned into questions, then doubts, then silence. She stopped calling my garage a workshop and started calling it that place. She stopped asking what I was building and started asking when I was going to get a proper job again. I tried to understand her fear. She worked at a dental office, saved carefully, planned everything, and hated uncertainty. I was the opposite, chasing a dream with splinters in my fingers and hope in my pockets. That morning, she arrived wearing her office clothes, neat and bright, while I stood in a faded shirt covered in wood dust. I had stayed up all night finishing a farmhouse dining table for a customer who canceled by text before sunrise. The message was still open on my phone, glowing like a fresh wound. Mireya walked slowly around the garage, her eyes moving over the clutter, the stacked chairs, the old tools I repaired instead of replaced, the calendar full of crossed-out deadlines. She did not shout. Somehow, that made it worse. She simply looked at me with tired eyes and said my business looked like failure wearing a different name. Those words hit harder than any slammed door. I wanted to defend myself, to tell her about every order I had almost landed, every compliment from strangers, every late night I had survived. But all I could see was the truth sitting around me in silent piles. The unpaid electricity notice on the bench. The landlord's message asking when I would catch up. The dining table nobody wanted. Mireya said she cared about me too much to watch me waste my life. She said love could not be built on excuses. Then she placed the spare key to my apartment on the edge of the workbench and left before I could find the right words to make her stay. For a long time, I did not move. Morning light stretched across the concrete floor, touching the table legs, the scattered nails, the old radio that no longer worked. Somewhere outside, someone was mowing grass. Life kept going with an ordinary rhythm, as if my heart had not just been split open beside a stack of walnut boards. I sat down on a paint bucket and stared at the key she had left behind. It looked small enough to fit in my palm, but it carried the weight of every promise I had failed to keep. By noon, I had decided to sell my tools. That decision did not come like thunder. It came quietly, like surrender. I told myself I was being practical. I told myself dreams were allowed to die if they became too expensive. I photographed my table saw, my clamps, my planer, even the hand tools my late father had given me before he passed. He used to say a man could lose money, lose sleep, even lose people, but he should never lose the thing that made his hands honest. I almost laughed bitterly when I remembered that. Honest hands did not stop eviction notices that I was dragging a stack of boards closer to the garage door when my neighbor, Mrs. Zafira Bell, appeared at the edge of my driveway. She lived 2 houses down in a small yellow home with flower pots lined along the steps and wind chimes that sang every afternoon. She was in her late 60s, maybe older, with silver hair pinned under a straw hat and a way of looking at people like she could hear the sentence they were too embarrassed to say. Most neighbors called her quiet. I called her kind. She had bought a small bookshelf from me the previous year and paid $20 extra, saying the corners were smoother than most people's manners. She asked why half my workshop was sitting in the driveway. I told her I was cleaning. She looked at the tools, then at my face, and said cleaning usually did not look like a funeral. I tried to smile, but it cracked before it formed. Maybe I was too tired to pretend. Maybe Mireya's words had opened something I could not close. I told Mrs. Bell everything, not neatly, not proudly, but in broken pieces. The cancelled order. The bills. The girlfriend who had stopped believing. The business that looked like failure from every angle except the one inside my chest. Mrs. Bell listened without interrupting. That was her gift. She did not rush to give advice or throw soft words over sharp pain. She stood in the daylight with both hands resting on her cane, eyes calm, letting me empty myself. When I finished, she stepped into the garage and ran her fingers gently along the edge of the abandoned dining table. The wood was honey-colored maple, with darker streaks like rivers under glass. I had spent 6 nights smoothing it until it felt warm under the hand. She looked at it for a long moment and said failure did not shine like that. I told her shine did not matter if nobody bought it. She turned toward me and said maybe nobody was buying because nobody had truly seen it yet. Then she told me something I had never known. Years before retiring, Mrs. Bell had owned a small event planning company in the city. She had organized charity auctions, garden weddings, business luncheons, school fundraisers, and community fairs. She knew people who still hosted events, people who needed display pieces, custom signs, rustic tables, and decorative stands. She said my work was not the problem. My silence was. I was making beautiful things in a garage and waiting for the world to magically walk in. I wanted to believe her, but hope felt dangerous. I had held it too many times and watched it cut me. Still, Mrs. Bell did not ask for permission to help. She told me to clean the workshop, not sell it. She told me to set up my best pieces in the driveway the next morning because daylight made would look honest. She said she would invite a few people. I asked how many. She smiled and said enough to make me sweep properly. That night, I almost gave up again. The silence of my apartment felt bigger without Mireya's spare key on the hook near the door. I checked my phone too many times, hoping she would message, fearing she would. Nothing came. So I went back to the garage and worked until my shoulders burned. I swept sawdust into heavy piles, polished the table, tightened loose chair legs, arranged shelves against a clean white sheet, and hung a hand-painted sign that said Ven Woodworks. The letters looked uneven to me, but real. By sunrise, the garage did not look like failure. It looked tired, stubborn, and alive. The next morning was bright and warm. Golden sunlight spilled over the roofs and turned every dust particle into a tiny spark. I placed the maple dining table in the center of the driveway, surrounded by benches, planter boxes, shelves, and small cutting boards. I wore my cleanest shirt and tried not to look desperate. At 9, nobody came. At 9:30, a delivery driver slowed down, looked, and kept going. My chest tightened. I imagined Mireya seeing me from a distance, standing alone beside unsold furniture, and I felt shame rise hot in my throat. Then Mrs. Bell arrived with a folding chair, a pitcher of lemonade, and 3 women from her old church group. Behind them came a man who owned a cafe downtown. Then a young couple planning a backyard wedding. Then a school principal. Then 2 neighbors I barely knew. By 10:30, my driveway was full of voices. People touched the table, asked prices, took photos, measured shelves, and ran their hands across the benches like they were testing proof. I answered questions awkwardly at first, then more steadily. Mrs. Bell stood near the lemonade, quietly telling people which pieces were made from reclaimed oak, which bench had hidden storage, which sign could be customized. She made my work sound valuable before I knew how to say it myself. The cafe owner, Mr. Orvin Pike, ordered 6 small tables for his outdoor seating area. The young couple asked for a wedding welcome sign and 2 rustic dessert stands. The principal wanted a reading corner bench for the school library. A woman named Celcy Grant bought the cancelled maple dining table on the spot, saying it reminded her of Sunday meals at her grandmother's house. When she paid the deposit, my hand shook so badly I almost dropped the receipt book. It was more money than I had made in 6 weeks, but the real test came just after noon, when Mireya drove past and I saw her car slow near the curb. For one painful second, our eyes met through the windshield. She looked at the people in my driveway, the table being loaded carefully into a truck, Mrs. Bell laughing with customers, and me standing there with a pencil behind my ear and a receipt in my hand. She did not stop. She drove on. My heart twisted, but not the way I expected. There was sadness, yes, but also something else. A quiet realization that proving her wrong could not be the only reason I survived. If my dream only existed to answer someone else's doubt, it would always belong to their opinion. The next weeks became the hardest and most beautiful days of my life. Orders came faster than I could handle. I woke before sunrise and worked until my palms blistered. Mrs. Bell helped me create simple flyers, called old contacts, and taught me how to price without apologizing. She said discounts were fine, but shame was not a business strategy. She made me practice saying numbers out loud until I stopped whispering them. She also made me write the story of each piece, where the wood came from, what it had been before, what it could become now. People loved that. They were not just buying furniture. They were buying second chances shaped into something useful. Still, success did not arrive cleanly. My planer broke during a rush order. A customer complained that a shelf was darker than expected. I miscalculated lumber costs and lost money on 3 benches. One afternoon, I cut my thumb badly and had to wrap it in gauze while finishing a school order. There were moments I sat on the garage floor breathing through panic, convinced everything would collapse again. But each time, Mrs. Bell appeared with lemonade, soup, or one sharp sentence that pulled me back. She reminded me that rebuilding a life was not one grand victory. It was 100 small refusals to quit. One Saturday, almost 2 months after Mireya left, Venn Woodworks was invited to provide display tables and custom signs for a community market in the town square. It was the kind of event I used to walk through as a customer, never imagining my name could be on a booth. The day was bright, full of white tents, flower stalls, handmade soaps, children with painted faces, and music floating from a small stage. My booth stood near the center, with polished shelves holding cutting boards, plant stands, and carved home signs. Mrs. Bell sat beside me wearing her straw hat like a crown. People stopped all day. Some bought small items. Others placed orders. A local blogger took photos. By mid-afternoon, I had booked enough work to cover my rent, my overdue bills, and my mother's medicine for 3 months. Then Mireya came. She walked slowly through the crowd, looking different from the woman who had left the key on my workbench. Not smaller, not cruel, just human. She stopped in front of a cedar bench and touched the armrest. I waited for anger to rise, but it did not. Only a soft ache remained. She told me she had seen the cafe tables downtown. She had seen my sign at the school library. She said people were talking about my work. Then her voice lowered, and she admitted she had been scared. Scared I would drown chasing a dream. Scared she would drown with me. Scared love would turn into bills and resentment. She said she was sorry for calling my business failure. For a moment, the market noise faded. I thought about all the nights I had wanted that apology like oxygen. But now that it was here, I understood something I could not have understood earlier. Her apology mattered, but it could not become the foundation under my feet. I thanked her. I told her I understood fear, because I had lived inside it. But I also told her that when she left, someone else had stood beside me without needing proof first. Mrs. Bell did not save my business by pretending it was perfect. She saved me by helping me see it clearly. Mireya cried quietly. I did not reach for her the way the old me would have, desperate to repair everything at once. Some endings do not need to become beginnings again. Some people teach you what love cannot survive. Others teach you what belief can build. We parted gently that afternoon, not as enemies, but as two people who had stood on opposite sides of a dream and finally understood the cost. Near sunset, after the market began to close, Mrs. Bell handed me an envelope. Inside was a printed application for a small business grant from a local craft foundation, already filled out except for my signature. She had attached photos, customer reviews, order records, and a letter of recommendation that made my eyes blur before I finished the first paragraph. She wrote that Venn Woodworks was not just a business, but a place where discarded things became useful again, including perhaps the man who ran it. I signed it with hands that no longer shook from fear. 3 months later, I received the grant. It was enough to rent a small storefront workshop on the edge of downtown, with tall front windows and space for classes. The first day I unlocked the door, sunlight poured across the empty floor exactly like it had in my garage on the morning Mireya called my dream a failure. But this time, the light did not feel cruel. It felt like a witness. Mrs. Bell stood beside me, wiping her eyes and pretending it was allergies. I placed my father's old hand plane on the front counter, then hung the same uneven Venn Woodwork sign on the wall because I wanted to remember where I started. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who is trying not to give up, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Lifeline Diaries. Sometimes your support becomes the small push that helps another person believe their broken dream can still be rebuilt. Special request, comment I still believe if you have ever had to keep going when someone you loved stopped believing in you. On opening day, the first customer was the school principal, who brought a group of children to see where their library bench had been made. The second was Mr. Pike from the cafe, carrying coffee for everyone. The third was Mrs. Bell, though she insisted neighbors did not count as customers. She brought me a small wooden plaque she had secretly ordered from another craftsman because, she said, even makers deserve to receive something made with care. It read, "Failure is not the end of a dream. Sometimes it is just the dust before the shine." That I mounted that plaque near the entrance, where every customer could see it. Years later, people would ask how my business began, and I would tell them about the cancelled order, the key on the workbench, the driveway full of sunlight, and the neighbor who saw value before the world did. I would tell them that being proved wrong can hurt, but being helped back up can heal places pride never reaches. And whenever someone came into my workshop with tired eyes, apologizing for wanting to start over too late, I would run my hand across the nearest piece of reclaimed wood and tell them what Mrs. Bell once taught me: nothing is useless just because someone failed to imagine what it could become.